Hello everyone and welcome back. We have our next session coming up just now. To kick that off, we've got Oliver Potter from Ground Control Technologies, who will be talking to us about 3GPP standards could unlock new cases for satellite connectivity in offshore wind. So thank you very much, Oliver.
Thank you, and hope everyone has been having a good conference so far. So as introduced, I'm Ollie Potter. I'm the COO here at Ground Control. One quick shameless slide as to who we are, so you know who you're talking to. So we're a relatively small business, just under 100 employees. We operate principally in the USA and the UK, but we have customers all around the world. And we help our customers really track, monitor, and control their remote assets. So we have the hardware that we design and manufacture to a large extent, and then the platforms that help you interrogate those devices and that data. So we wanted to talk to you about 3GPP. And 3GPP, for those of you who don't know, is the cellular standards body that really set the standards for, mobile technology that you and I have in our pockets. So this is your 3G, 4G, 5G standards. And what is currently being talked about or starting to be implemented is how that may be used in satellites in order to create IoT and data services from space that you could use everywhere. So we're going to kind of break that down a little bit as we go forward. So first of all, kind of really thinking about your sector and your industry. So a lot of solutions use a sort of hub technology. So really kind of two ones that we've seen out there, LoRaWAN, which is a low-powered solution, and then of course private 5G, which obviously has a much higher power, much higher throughput option. And here, you don't need any cellular coverage because you're going to use your local network. Your hardware costs can be very low in a LoRaWAN perspective, or in 5G you'll be familiar with those. And you can play with the edge computing around any of your sensors, so you can really make the transmission very small, and you can make it very cost effective. But of course, to do this, you've got to install all of the infrastructure. But that infrastructure can be used once you put fiber into a particular site later down the line, so it can work well in the future. Obviously, the difficulty of this is you've got to set it all up, and you've got to install all of the hardware, and all of the different vendors involved would then have to support the same system in order for their communications to work on that particular system. So a good solution, works very well, and I don't think 3GPP will impact this particularly. So really kind of setting that out at the beginning. The second area then is kind of really using direct technologies for offshore wind farms. So this is where you're connecting directly to any kind of particular asset and not using a sort of local hub, so a 5G hub or a LoRaWAN hub on the site. So obviously you don't need any infrastructure. There's no distance limitation, of course, between the sensors, and kind of really particularly, any vendors can operate independently across all different sites. So if you've got a particular sensor and you're working as a supplier into the offshore wind sector, you could have the same device working in the same way in America, in the UK, kind of anywhere around the world. And clearly that is of a real advantage. And the challenge to this typically has been the cost. So the cost per device and per connection is typically higher than what you'd have in a LoRaWAN or a 5G scenario, assuming you have lots of LoRaWAN or 5G connections. Clearly, if you only have one or two, then this is a cheaper solution. So as I think I've probably jumped the gun on this. So looking at this slide, what we really think about is, if it's a few sensors or you're looking at a multi-site solution, then you kind of really need to connect them independently. But if you've got a high density of sensors in a particular site, you could use LoRa or private 5G in order to connect those, and then you get the benefit of the density of those devices. But I guess the big question we're all here is what if 3GPP in particular drove lower costs, and does that change that dynamic? So I kind of really wanted to talk to you about what's happening and the insight around that. So 3GPP, kind of headlined this at the beginning. So there's a global body of lots of interested parties. Typically, it's been all of the mobile operators around the world, or many of them, but now includes some of the satellite networks as well. And they have been working together to enhance the mobile standards to allow them to be operated from space. And obviously the initiative is driven around the ability to connect every mobile phone and every IoT device anywhere on the planet. So I think today mobile cellular coverage covers about 20% of the Earth's surface. So it's really going after the other 80%. Now that 80% is already covered by some fantastic networks like Iridium, Inmarsat, Viasat, Globalstar, Starlink are probably the main networks that are out there. But 3GPP standards might change that dynamic a little bit, because today all of those networks have proprietary standards. So if you want to use Starlink, you have to use a Starlink terminal, and you can't switch your Starlink terminal to work with, say, another satellite network. And that's equally true of Iridium modems and equally true of Viasat modems as well. So you are tied into the particular satellite network you've got, but that's not to say they're not great solutions. They're absolutely fantastic solutions, really well designed for satellite, but 3GPP might change that. So first thing that 3GPP might change is, I guess, really two things here. So the ability to switch between supplier potentially becomes viable. So today, if you put an IoT asset anywhere in the world and it's connected to a wind farm, say in the North Sea, you are connected to whatever satellite network you chose, and you would have to go and replace the hardware out on that particular asset. So one of the envisaged benefits would be is if there were two satellite networks with a 3GPP service, then you could potentially switch between the two satellite networks. That infers potential competition, that infers potential benefit on certainly long-term price that you might be exposed to, because you always have the threat of moving from one supplier to the other. The other potential benefit, although this is solved somewhat already, is if you have moving assets that are moving around, you could hop between cellular coverage and satellite coverage. Now, there are many devices out there today that have a cellular modem and a sort of proprietary satellite modem, so that works well today. But this might make it a little bit neater than it has been to date, because you'd have a single subscription that would manage that. The second side, which is probably where the main benefit really comes from, is the scale of manufacture of devices, or particularly of the modules. So cellular modules are designed and manufactured in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions. And consequently, there is a real economy of scale in the manufacture of them. And in contrast, the sort of satellite modules that have been sort of bespoke for a particular satellite network have been higher priced than certainly what the market is talking about for these 3GPP modules. So one benefit that we're all expecting is the module cost should reduce, and then in turn that might reduce then the device cost. And then obviously, if you can have a reduced device cost, you might have a lower total cost of ownership for rolling out any of these. One of the benefits that we're already seeing is that I guess the threat potentially might be seen as the coming arrival of 3GP modules has driven some of the networks to start already enabling the chip manufacturers, so the Quectels and U-Bloxes of this world, to manufacture the proprietary modules, and that in turn will also reduce their cost. So 3GPP or not, we're starting to already see some benefits that can flow through. And this is all great because we're starting to move into better total cost of ownership figures that make more use cases viable. So benefit number one, the competition from the networks. Benefit number two, potentially cheaper modules, therefore cheaper devices, and overall, therefore, a cheaper total cost of ownership. So let's look at the networks. So let's start at the top. So there are established satellite network operators, and the kind of two main ones that are really talking about this are Viasat and Iridium. So Viasat is talking about launching a narrowband IoT service, so it would support the narrowband IoT standard. You would have to have modules that would be release 17 compatible in order to work with it. And there is a service you can test now. We have devices in our labs that we're working. We've got trackers and IoT devices that we're working with right now, and we're testing those on the network. I think they're kind of really looking for a full network launch later next year, or middle of next year. But Viasat is coming out the gates. Iridium too are deeply looking at it. They're working very closely with the 3GPP standards, and I think they're probably a year after Viasat. I don't think I've got a definitive timeline, but sort of 26, 27 timeline for Iridium. Now, the benefits of these two really significantly over the others is they have spectrum that is licensed for satellite all around the world. So they have the potential capacity and the potential landing rights everywhere in the world in order to provide this service. So a really important part of 3GPP, obviously well-known satellite networks with satellites up there already. Then you have kind of the newer constellations that one of them you'll definitely be familiar with, Starlink, and the other two perhaps not. Now, Starlink and Link and AST Mobile are driving, well, their motivation around this is they want to be able to provide smartphone connectivity in particular. So this is at very least sort of emergency text messaging, but probably a data and voice service as well. They have a different spectrum strategy, so they're looking to repurpose spectrum that a mobile operator has in any particular country, and then use that to be broadcast from the satellite, not the cell tower, in order to provide this service. So Starlink have announced in the USA that they'll be doing that with T-Mobile, and AST SpaceMobile have announced they'll do it in the USA with Verizon and AT&T. As far as I understand, in the UK, I don't think there's any operators that have kind of gone down this route at the moment. The advantage for these guys is they may get the spectrum, but the challenge will be the coverage might be patchy. It might work in some countries because they've got the spectrum, and in other countries there may not be any spectrum and any service. So, and these guys are looking at a different service. So while Viasat and Iridium are looking at narrowband IoT, which is really kind of credible for IoT use cases, the Starlink, Link, AST are looking at Cat1 connectivity, so 4G that you might know. I mean, it won't be 4G as you expected on your phone. It will be much slower 4G and contended with other users, but that's what these guys are looking for. So this could play well, particularly in certain countries where it operates. But the challenge will be you won't have a global service for the foreseeable because there's a lot of hurdles to overcome getting access to that spectrum and working with regulators to allow them to do it. Then there are some startups that are really kind of quite innovative. They are also providing a service. Now, these currently don't have anywhere near the density of satellites that people above have, but they're worth just mentioning because I guess they've probably stimulated this market more than anything by their existence. So Sateliot and OQ are out there. I think that you get sort of one pass every 6-8 hours, depending on kind of what particular service they are and where they are in their launch schedule. But they'll be offering a service as well. So you can see a number of different networks looking to support the 3GPP standards and the potential for competition down the line when multiple of these networks are doing it. So 3GPP, we expect it to be coming, a bit early next year, but really kind of starting to have an impact when there are multiple networks and there are really 17 modules available. So we're really looking 2-3 years away for kind of some meaningful impact. But early adopters, early innovators could probably get started in some form next year. So I wanted to just kind of go back to, well, what are our customers using today and what are we talking to them about? So satellite may not be what you expected, certainly for this narrowband side. So many of our customers use what we have as the rock block. So this is a messaging device that is an OEM device, so you can build it into your own infrastructure, so your own asset. So and it can do a 270 to 320 byte message, bytes per message. So you can get quite a lot of information off it. They work anywhere in the world. And the beauty of these are they're not very expensive. They're a couple of $100, and you're talking, small number of dollars per month in order to provide, a decent amount of messages going backwards and forth. So we see these in data buoys, in temperature sensors. We see them in tsunami warning systems and all sorts of different things in the kind of marine environment. We also have a newer device that we're working with a number of different customers on, where we've taken that same messaging technology and enabled you to, in a single IP68 rated case, to then hook that up with a sensor or a switch, or both actually, in order to kind of remotely operate those. And again, it's lots more expensive than the rock block. You're getting to sort of $400 or $500 for one of these. But again, you're using the same SBD messaging technology, works everywhere on the planet. And you're only, somewhere between 7, 8, 9, maybe up to a few teams worth of dollars per month, depending on how many messages you want to be sending per day or per hour. And then for sort of slightly higher throughput applications, so compressed video sometimes, or big arrays of sensors, perhaps on some of the data buoys, we're looking at the Rock Remote range of products. So these are much bigger message sizes, so up to 100 kilobits per message, or TCP/IP streaming at 22 up and 88 down kilobits per second. So we see a kind of good number of people using that, and these enable you to have all of your assets anywhere in the world connected in the same way, so you can kind of monitor them in that way. Now, my expectation is, and we're already working, as I said, in our labs, that we'll have a 3GPP version of these relatively soon, for kind of certainly with testing, and then as more bandwidth comes available from the satellite networks, maybe into 25, 26, 27, start to roll those out at more scale. So there we go. So 3GPP expected to be a fairly big change as we go forward, really driving a bit of competition and hopefully reducing prices and total cost of ownership, making more IoT business cases make sense. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much for that, Oliver. Fascinating presentation there. Now, I would encourage anyone who's got any questions to just stick them in the Q&A section. We'll pick up on those as they come through. In the meantime, I've got some questions to ask. That's all right. So with lots of new entrants in an emerging sort of technology area, for companies that are potentially interested in adopting this, what questions should they be asking, both internally within their own organization and of a potential supplier, to ensure they select the most appropriate network/technology?
I mean, there's a lot of change going on, so I definitely encourage you, well, come talk to us, come and talk to me. There have been a lot of new satellite networks that have been announced and then have failed. And one of the biggest changes in this world has been Starlink, or SpaceX, and Elon Musk has significantly reduced the cost of putting a satellite into space. So more people have tried. But the danger we have observed over the last few years is many of these newest networks haven't been viable, and the danger is you roll out your estate and then the network fails. So you really want to be choosing a network that's got spectrum, it's got longevity, kind of assured it's going to be there. Then you're looking at all of the factors around price and total cost of ownership and how you can achieve that over the long run. There are going to be many practical considerations like your view of the sky and do you want to have to point the antenna or not, which would determine some of the networks that you use. And then equally battery life and the amount of data you want to pass through. And we would work with a customer to go through all of those options in order to make the right call.
And I guess there would need to be some very clear discussion around what data they actually need and the value of that data. I guess we're all aware that there's plenty of temptation to send lots of data all the time and then work out what to do with it. I take it there's a really only where it's really clear and needed.
Yeah, so one of the big things that we work with our customers on is really trying to clarify what is the information that is needed to be sent. So let's say you had a temperature sensor. Do you need to send temperature every minute or every 15 seconds? Could you just report changes in temperature? So if it's a stable temperature, it doesn't report anything. So we work to kind of really understand how we can optimize the transmission of that data. We also work very hard with our customers to remove things like all of the human readable text. So we code all of the information on the edge. We then transmit it very, very efficiently because we've coded it all. And then we unpack that data and put all the human readable text and lay it out really simply on our platforms that then can be consumed in many different ways, but an API feed in from our platforms to yours, for example. So yes, satellite is more expensive. We're talking about reducing data. We typically reduce data almost 90% versus the cellular equivalent. You're removing the TCP/IP overheads, you're removing the human readable text, you're focusing on the information changes, not the information, and then you get exactly the same out the end that you would otherwise get, but you've saved a lot of money in the process.
Great, thanks for that. We do have a question in the chat here. Do you have any data on message size and frequency allowed in a low-cost rock block device deployment?
Yes, so as per the kind of, I guess, the previous slide, so you're looking at 270 to 320 bytes per message, and you can send those messages every few minutes realistically. So you can get a lot of data out from those sort of devices.
Great. And in terms of, I mean, you touched on it in the presentation, but timeframes for really realizing the true value of 3GPP standards-based technology. When do you think that will really start to kick in?
It's a good question, and I spend a lot of time thinking about this. So you need modules to be available supporting Release 17 at a reasonable scale to have brought down the total cost of ownership. They're not really available yet. You can get some test ones now, or you can kind of retrofit some of the older release ones to support it for testing. So our guess is you get the early runs next year, but then maybe into 26 you start to see a bit more volume available there. You need the networks and presumably multiple networks to support it. I think Viasat realistically will be, I know there's the Skylo service and there's the Sateliot service. I think really the Viasat one will fill in for global coverage, excluding the poles admittedly, but generally global coverage. And providing that viable service mid to late next year. I think then with a bit of competition from Iridium, you have something really interesting in 26, 27. From the sort of Cat 1 service, I think it will be patchy. Patchy starting next year with a few countries. And then it's hard to tell, but again, 26, 27 is probably when it becomes more viable at a bit more scale. So if I was a betting person, next year a few people will try it in limited circumstances, then 26 a bit more, and then 27, 28. That's probably when I would expect to see some scale deployments using the 3GPP standards.
All right, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're going to have to move on now, but my thanks to you, Oliver, and thanks for an interesting presentation and question session there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me along.